I appreciate you being here today, and I'm very happy to welcome back to the show our friend Will Chamberlain. Will Chamberlain is with the Article 3 Project. He's on X at Will Chamberlain, senior counsel to the Article 3 Project, which you can also follow at Article 3 Project. And it's great to have him here with us today. Will, what's going on? How are you?
Doing good. Great to be with you.
I wanted to ask you a couple things, but first of all, you tweeted out, and I was watching Speaker Johnson this morning with some of the insane things the Democrats are demanding to keep the government open right now.
hmm
I think they're making huge mistakes here, but I mean, climate resilience in Honduras and civic engagement in Zimbabwe and $3.9 million for LGBTQ plus democracy grants in the Balkans. Have they learned nothing from the last election, Will?
Apparently not. I think this is a big mistake on their part. The whatever claim they may have that we need a kind of continuation of healthcare subsidies to prevent insurance costs from spiking. That's not a reason to shut down the government. That's a policy debate. I think the administration would be willing to work with them on it probably, but they're not going to let the Democrats hold the entire government hostage to do it. And when the goal here is to get an entire massive spending package through, otherwise we shut down the government. It's easy for the Trump administration to say, well, I mean, fine, the government's shut down. We control the executive branch. We'll start making cuts where the places you least want them. And that's how things are going.
Yeah, and they own this. I mean, I think there's no doubt about that. They own this because I think most people look at this and they say, okay, well, who's the opposition here? Who are the people not voting for this? And it's the Democrats. It's not like the president. I mean, if anyone should be upset, theoretically, it would be conservatives because you'd say we want to cut spending. They're not even trying to do that. They just want to keep the Biden level of spending going. So I think it's very hard politically for the Democrats to argue that this is Trump's shutdown in any way.
Yeah, I mean they're trying to make this argument, but it's very, very weak. They're playing dumb. They're pretending that the filibuster doesn't exist. They're saying things like, "Well, Republicans control the House, Senate, and the presidency. They can do whatever they want." And I think they're trying to get the Republicans to eliminate the filibuster so they don't have to do it next time they take power. It's a really good lesson about what Democrats are all about here. It's just there's this one great tweet that so much of political discourse involves the left pretending not to understand things and therefore making discourse impossible. And that's sort of what they're doing here. They're pretending not to understand that the filibuster exists.
You wrote a piece I wanted to chat with you about. It's entitled AI's National Security Facade Threatens Americans' Intellectual Property.
hmm
You said defense-oriented AI applications typically require fine-tuning on specialized data sets, decades of government satellite imagery, and weather data rather than episodes of Yellowstone. We're all talking about AI. We're all worried about AI and what's going on with Washington. Big tech companies right now
hmm
framing an authorized use of copyrighted works as essential for beating Chinese artificial intelligence. Let's talk about that. What do we mean by Americans' intellectual property rights as noted in the
Right.
Constitution?
So I mean, basically what AI companies are doing is they're ingesting all this material, the entire written corpus of the internet, including an enormous amount of copyrighted material. Like if you write something on the internet, that's copyrighted. And if the AI is using that, training itself, and then regurgitating things in similar style or regurgitating things, well, there's a serious copyright infringement going on there. And so, these AI companies are taking in enormous amounts of investment. There needs to be some accommodation for the fact that they're using other people's creative work, copyrighted work, in order to produce an output. And whatever. And I think the point I'm trying to make there is whatever national security claims are involved or security interests are involved in terms of the development of AI, those are not in the same, they're not reliant on exploiting people's intellectual property. That's what I would say. And so I think the idea here is ultimately we should see, intellectual property rights being respected by AI companies and there being some compensation for their use.
Well, like, for example, this piece about AI and intellectual property rights is your intellectual property, which
Mhm.
you've published at humanevents.com and maybe other places as well. But theoretically, AI can just snatch everything you've written. And then if some high school kid's writing a story about intellectual property rights, they can just steal your intellectual property and just regurgitate it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the AI companies. There's a general, theory in Silicon Valley, move fast, break things. And I understand the general importance. And I'm not someone who's sitting here saying we don't need AI. It's an incredibly powerful tool and that we want to be dominant in. But we just can't. You're not going to throw all of intellectual property law out the window in the process. You're not going to let these companies not compensate, the people who put in the effort to create the intellectual property in the first place that they're using to train their models. There needs to be compensation for that.
And how do we do that? I mean, what's the best way you think to approach that?
I mean, you end up seeing things like, I mean, you can have broad-based settlements with authors. I mean, there's big, as far as I know, there's like big consortiums of, websites and news outlets. There can be some sort of settlement here where there's just sort of like a default fee to be using the resources for AI purposes of the New York Times or the Washington Post. Some other institutions set up to help like smaller independent creators get access to some of that. Like, for example, like Substack, for example, would be another place where, you might make a deal with Substack to be AI companies might be forced to make a deal with Substack in order to read the content that they have there and ingest it into their system. Less so than you would think in, other circumstances where you're straight up recopying or republishing somebody else's work, but still some acknowledgement of the use case.
I was thinking about this last night. I was with Jack Carr, the author, and he's written a lot about quantum computers and supercomputers and the threat that they pose to our defense. And as we were talking about this thought kept running through my mind, which is that, plagiarism used to be something that you could spot pretty easily. And nowadays, AI can hunt for plagiarism, but it can also create the plagiarism that it's also hunting at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important for people that make their living doing this to be able to protect them and their intellectual property rights. Because I could theoretically tell ChatGPT what I want for a novel, and it could regurgitate. I mean, it could spit out an entire novel for me. And I'm not saying it would get published. I'm not even saying that I would make money on it, but I could self-publish it theoretically. I could copyright it. And then it's on the person whose ideas that either I stole or ChatGPT stole. They have to actively come after me. I mean, that's kind of how the law works, right? And they have to prove something. And it's a lot of work for them. And I'm just wondering what the best way to prevent that would be, if there is a way.
I mean, I think that there's a lot of ways that exist contractually for publishers to kind of make sure that authors aren't using copyrighted material. And that's something when you sign a publishing deal and you're writing a book, you warrant that you're not going to use copyrighted material and that you actually indemnify the company for any of the consequences of having published it. And then so you combine the fact that authors should be responsible enough not to do that with the fact that the publishers have an incentive to check on that before they publish the book. I think there's a lot of ways to prevent, outright theft via book in that manner. And I don't think you see too much of it. The problem here is not necessarily the sort of republication of books wholesale and stealing people's intellectual property so much as it's just the fact that it's being used and similar things. Like, you could ask an AI to write something in the style of a given author or write a piece in the Yoli, and they might go and use and vacuum up what we've done before and essentially produce something that is very much in our style. Well, I think that's you're using somebody's copyrighted work in order to do that. And there should be some constraints.
Will Chamberlain's with us, the Article 3 Project. I appreciate him being here today as we're talking about intellectual property and protecting that as time goes on. It is a big problem that we all worry about. The other thing we worry about, too, when it comes to this is just making sure that we're protecting Americans' individual rights from the government, from the military complex. I mean, all of these things, as we have AI as more and more of the ability to kind of track us and know our thoughts and know our writings. What's the latest on that in terms of the law in protecting, say, my right, your right, to not have these companies prey on me?
I don't think the laws change that much on this front. I don't think there's actually new federal rules about how to, the use of artificial intelligence as applied to information they're currently lawfully allowed to collect. And maybe there should be some changes there, because if you're able to collect you can essentially get a clear pattern of life about a person. Mm-hmm. Information, especially once you take the power of an AI model and apply it to analyzing what you're doing. I mean, that's really, Palantir does that very well. And that said, there's some right wingers who are anti-Palantir. I'm not. Like, I know the people who were involved in founding it. Joe Lonsdale is an absolute mensch, great dude. don't want America to be weak when it comes to intelligence and data analysis. I think it's really important that we're actually very good at it because it prevents them from needing more information and giving them an excuse to violate law and do unreasonable searches and seizures. But it might be time that we need to like throttle back on exactly how much information is able to be publicly collected because of how what a clear pattern, how much of an infringement it is on privacy.
Yeah, it really is, and it's concerning as time goes on about that. No doubt about that. Let me ask you this. I mean, these age verification laws that a lot of states are putting in place, which are very well intentioned, obviously, to prevent kids from looking at pornography and things like that. But what about the ability to go after your government anonymously and criticize your government and to ensure that that data is not something that some bureaucrat can quickly access because you put in your driver's license to look at, the latest thing on like Pornhub or whatever it is, and how do you preserve your anonymity online in this day and age?
I mean, you have to figure out a way to firewall it, obviously. But I think, on that subject, I definitely come down on the side of these age verification laws. I think it's really, we should be able to make laws about American companies doing American business in this country. I don't think it's in the interests of Americans to have pornography available to teenagers and younger children. I think we should try and restrict that as much as possible. And I think age verification laws are very good. And I don't really. I hear these arguments about, well, the government might use this information really badly, and it's like, well, there's an immediate pressing concern of children being able to access pornographic material, and we should want to stop that.
You think there's a way that we could firewall it from the government so then
Sure.
because that's
Yeah, I think you just write the law. You write the law in such a way that says the information collected needs to be state firewalled. Government doesn't have access to it, or the government can just audit it to make sure that you are in fact collecting this information, but it doesn't have some right to information you wouldn't otherwise have about who specifically is doing it. And I think there are services that do this. That they essentially have an AI service that looks at your ID to make sure it's a real thing, and then deletes all the information immediately after and just keeps the information that this user passed the age check or whatever. I think there's ways to do that.
Well, on the broader issue of the Article 3 courts, since the Supreme Court has kind of reined in these nationwide injunctions, have you noticed an improvement in this, or are we still dealing with these lefty judges who are trying to battle President Trump at every turn?
Yeah, we're still getting a lot of lefty judges doing this. They're using different vehicles now. That's the problem. There's a lot of agency action delays. That's essentially the new mechanism. It's sort of like using the Administrative Procedure Act to set aside agency action. And the effect of setting aside agency action for one person is effectively to set it aside for everybody in many of these cases. So there just ends up being a lot of procedural vehicles to do what the nationwide injunction used to do. That said, there are limitations on them that are good. We also talked about, I think, class actions in the past. And I think that the government's generally in better shape in terms of being able to, if they win one of these, they've won the issue, period. And they aren't having to constantly play whack-a-mole with litigation over the exact same issue in a variety of different courts.
Because that takes a long time, right?
Yeah, it's a huge drain on DOJ's resources.
It's also just frustrating and so antithetical to why we have courts in the first place. I mean, the idea that these judges can act as a president and stop the duly elected president is frustrating. One of those, I think, prime examples of that, obviously, is what we're seeing this argument from the media that the lawfare that was used against President Trump, he's now using it back to them. So the great example will be Letitia James in New York. I mean, here's somebody who ran on going after Donald Trump. In the course of that, it turns out that, hey, she's got this mortgage fraud. Now they indict her on that, and people are screaming that this is warfare. But I mean, in my mind, it's pretty simple. If you go after somebody, you better make sure that your house is pretty clean here, because you know that they're going to come looking at you as well. And if you're breaking the law and you're the attorney general and you're weaponizing your office and going after people, I don't really look at that as reverse weaponization. I look at that as politics 101.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also deterrence. What Letitia James did to the president. I mean, she ran for office on the promise of prosecuting him, of going after his money, of going after his organizations, which is an appalling thing to do.
Yeah.
And so we want to deter that going forward, and we're going to prosecute prosecutable crimes. And if the allegations in the case against James are true, it's garden variety mortgage fraud. This isn't some complicated novel theory. This isn't some extension of a law, a repurposing of an old law that's never been used in this way. No, it's garden variety mortgage fraud and a species of mortgage fraud that's committed every day by a lot of people and prosecuted every day by a lot of in a lot of places by federal authorities. So this is she really doesn't have any excuse. Like it's very straightforward. You have to attest that what you're going to use the house for. And if you attest that it's going to be your primary residence or your secondary residence, you get a lower rate than if it's an investment property. Mm-hmm. And it's not right to just lie to the bank to get a cheaper loan. And that's oddly enough, that's exactly the theory she went after President Trump for, saying that he lied to the Deutsche Bank and all these extremely highly sophisticated banks about the valuation of Mar-a-Lago. That was all frivolous, obviously, because her valuation of Mar-a-Lago was trivial and absurdly small. But if she's out here talking about how important it is to enforce these laws and protect banks from lenders who are dishonest with them, it's like, excuse me, who are you? You did this for your little $150,000 house in Virginia. Why should we take you seriously?
Before I let you go, Will Chamberlain, James Comey, the case against him, have you had a chance to review it? How do you think the argument is?
I think it's really simple. He said he didn't leak. He testified in front of Congress, raised his hand and took the oath. And that wasn't true. And so he's got to defend himself from a perjury charge. Again, another very garden variety indictment where, Roger Stone got prosecuted on the same facts or similar facts. So maybe Comey can come out and say that, well, I thought I was telling the truth, or Comey can say I wasn't lying. What I said was true. Okay, go for it. Feel free to defend yourself. But based on the facts that have been revealed by Kash Patel and others, looks like he lied under oath. And of all the people that should never lie under oath, the FBI director is one of them because he's the person investigating other people for lying under oath.
I personally have a problem with anybody that lies to Congress. I really do. And we've seen a lot of people get off who did lie to Congress and nothing ever happened to them. And then it became very selective who they went after, primarily people like Roger Stone that you mentioned and others. And it was ridiculous because all these other people who'd lied, James Clapper comes to mind. Nothing.
That's exactly who I thought of.
Yeah.
Clapper engaged in one of those brazen lies to Congress. Ron Wyden asked him on the record, like, are you collecting any type of information on millions of Americans? And he said no. And then he knew that Wyden knew he was lying, went to him afterwards, said, do you want to correct the record here? And Clapper was like, no. It was a brazen perjury charge. Yeah. And the Obama administration decided not to prosecute. It's like, okay, well, then if you go after somebody like Roger Stone, we know what the game is. And people aren't going to take it seriously. So guess what? New world, if you want to go after our guys for this stuff, then we're going to prosecute James Comey for lying to Congress. If he lied to Congress, it's not, the whole idea of sort of, showing restraint, prosecutorial restraint, or using discretion to kind of, gloss over crimes committed by our political opponents, that's gone now. They indicted Trump 4 times. We're not doing that anymore.
I should also mention Ron Wyden's a Democrat, and that's important because he was going after Clapper too. It wasn't just a situation where it was just Republicans. I mean, there were a lot of people who were very concerned about the civil liberties violations back then. Wyden was, one of the guys leading the charge, but he's a Democrat. So yeah, and I mean, back when he was a lot more heterodox and not willing to tolerate a lot of the stuff from the Obama administration. Yeah. Will Chamberlain, always a pleasure. Follow Will on X @Will Chamberlain and the Article 3 Project. Thanks, my friend. Good seeing you again.
Thanks for having me.